You're now watching Wayback Wednesday, sponsored by Davenport Auto Park, the ride of your life. And also sponsored by Flores Glass, serving the area since 1977 with residential and commercial work.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to another episode of Wayback Wednesday. I'm Randy Adcock. So glad you could be with us tonight. We've got a lot of ground to cover tonight, and we're going to start off, going to tell you a story about a gentleman who was very prominent in Rocky Mountain many years ago, before most of us were even born or thought about in some cases. But this all started as a result of a picture that was sent to me by one of our viewers, Randy Harrell, who watches the show every week, either live or on the replays on the weekend, sent me a picture. And it was a picture that I immediately recognized as being an aerial view of a portion of Rocky Mount. And right in the center of the picture was the old Rocky Mount High School, later R.M. Wilson Junior High School. And so he had drawn a big red circle around that, identified it as R.M. Wilson Junior High. And then up in the upper left-hand corner of the picture, he had drawn another circle around a property. And he asked, in his text he sent me, he said, "What is this? Do you know what this property is?" And I looked at it, and I really had no clue. And so I replied back and I said, "I'm guessing some kind of motel or hotel maybe," but that was just a guess at that time. So I started out trying to find out what this building was. And I got a visit from Eric Dawson this week, a couple of visits in fact, and I showed it to Eric, and he and I put our heads together, and he had a chance to run over there yesterday and look at the spot. And I went today, in fact, took some pictures. I'll show you later on the pictures I took today. But as it turns out, it was a house. And in its heyday, in its glory days, I'll say, from what I understand, it was a beautiful home, a very stately home, very majestic, in fact. And it's just heartbreaking what has happened at this property over the years. I want to start off, first of all, by showing you the picture that Randy Harrell sent me. And so, Lee, if you would, put picture number 1 on the screen for our viewers. And there's a lot going on in this picture, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a lot of it, but I'm going to primarily focus on this property that I mentioned that was in the upper left-hand corner of the picture. But, you know, the picture was taken somewhere in the early 1950s, we think, based on what we can make out from the automobiles and so forth. I'm going to guess 50, 51 maybe. And so I went and pulled up a 1952 city directory online. I've got several of them that I've got online. And so I looked to see what was in that picture, in that vicinity in 1952. It was really interesting what all was very close to not only the Rocky Mount High School, because keep in mind, in 1952, that still was Rocky Mount High School. It was 1953 that Rocky Mount Senior High opened a new high school. So it was a high school in 1952 there. And of course, you'll see in just a minute when we get the picture on the screen, I'll run through some things that are in that picture. But there were several, in fact, hardly any of the businesses. Here we go. Here's the picture. So right in the center of the screen there, you see the Rocky Mount. He's got it listed as R.M. Wilson. Like I said, it was Rocky Mount High School during this time frame this picture was made. And then, of course, later years it became R.M. Wilson Junior High School. In the upper left-hand corner of the screen, you see the other red circle he drew there. And I know it's hard to make out in this picture. It's not very clear when we try to reproduce these images on the television equipment sometimes here in the studio. But like I said, I could zoom in on it, had my office computer, and it was really hard to tell whether it was a house, a motel, a hotel, or whatever. And that's when I showed it to Eric, and he and I got talking about it. He said, "Well, I'm gonna ride over there and look at it," and so he did. And he called me, and he made a couple phone calls and talked to someone who actually remembered the home in its heyday and had actually been inside the home. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but there's a lot going on in this picture that I didn't realize when I first looked at it. And I've seen this picture before. I've actually got a copy of this myself. This is the one that Randy sent me. But when I pulled the 1952 city directory and was just looking to see what all was visible in this picture, is Marigold Street, of course, is the street that runs directly in front of the most recent R.M. Wilson Junior High School. Now it's actually an apartment, I should say. It hadn't been a junior high school in a number of years. But that's Marigold Street. It runs in front of it, of course. And to your right of the picture, Marigold Street right there, just as it comes over the railroad tracks and crosses into Edgecombe County and becomes Marigold Street. The 1952 City Directory lists these businesses right there in that little section, just to the upper right-hand side of your screen there. That dark roof building, of course, is the old A&P. Remember that. It was badly damaged in 1954 when Hurricane I just went blank. Somebody call and remind me which hurricane came through in 54. I'm drawing a blank at the moment. But anyway, that's the A&P. This was before it was damaged, of course, by the hurricane. But these were the businesses that were right there in that block, just to the right of the old high school, in the first block of Marigold Street. Address 100 to 104 was Motor Bearings and Parts. Address 101 was Spur Distributing Company. And out beside it says Filling Station. So I guess it was one and the same. And then, of course, the address of 103 was the City Lunch Restaurant. 105 was W. Earl Walker, so there was a residence right there, too. 107 was the Rocky Mount Bowling Center. 110 to 114 was Fisher Radio Repairs. 116 was Rocky Mount Radio Works. And then, of course, 201 to 203, there was another service station called Marigold Service Station right there on the corner. And that would have been on the corner of Marigold and I guess Arlington Street there. And then, of course, the very next business would have been the A&P grocery store there in that dark roof building. So all that was going on right there in that one little segment of Marigold Street in 1952. And, of course, this residence in the upper left-hand corner of your screen was also inhabited. And so I wanted to find out, first of all, who owned the home and what I could find out about it. And so I began searching. And before we go any further, I want to show also a recent aerial picture. So Lee, if you would, let's put up the second picture. This is also an aerial picture that I pulled off the Edgecombe County GIS website. And as you can see, this is directly looking down on that property. And the address today, this is interesting too, because this street today is known as Discovery Street. It runs basically north-south, and I'm not exactly sure when the name changed, but in the time frame that this house was occupied, up until sometime in the 1970s, I'm guessing, this was Raleigh Street. And of course, at one time, Rocky Mount had both the Raleigh Street and the Raleigh Road, but this was Raleigh Street. And the actual physical address of this property right here was 327 in later years, and strangely, in earlier years, it was 323, same property, but they changed the addressing, and I'll show you that when we get a little bit later on in the show. We got some more information about the property, but this is an aerial photograph looking straight down on the property. It was, and the address most recent was 327 Discovery Street now. That's what it's called now. So what used to be called Raleigh Street is now Discovery Street. Okay, so I went back. As I said, I've got a pretty good collection of Rocky Mount City directories going all the way back to 1908. And so I wanted to see how long ago this property was there. So I went to the 1908. If you remember from previous shows, some city directories were actually combined. They put 2 years into one. And that's what happened in 1908 and 1909. They combined 2 years of city directory into one edition. It probably came out midway of 1909. But anyway, Lee, if you would, go ahead and put up picture number 3. And this is actually the Rocky Mount City Directory listing from 1908, 1909, and we'll have it up on the screen for you just a second here. And it actually shows this, okay, there you go, and zoom out from it, Lee. I'm not sure why it blew up that big, but in any case, give us just a minute to size it right so we can see it on the screen there. But what it shows is that a gentleman by the name of William Henry Horn, H-O-R-N, lived here, and there we go, Henry W. Horn. W. Henry Horn. William Henry Horn was the name, and you see the address listed there is 323 Raleigh Street, and this was in 1908, 1909. So fast forward a few years to 1912 city directory, and Lee, go ahead and put that one if you would. It be item number 4. And in 1912, the address for this same residence, William Henry Horn, was, I think it's still 323, in fact. And, we got the map here. How did we get the map in here already? Did I jump one? Did I skip one, Lee? I guess I did. Was this number 3? I'm sorry? This is number 3? Okay. Okay, number 4. Okay, I'm sorry. I did get sidetracked for a moment. Let's go to the map then. That my mistake. This is a map of the area, and right now it's zoomed out. So I'll let Lee zoom in just a minute, but in the upper part of your screen there's Marigold Street that comes across and angles down to the right. Right there where that little star is, up there in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, that's where the Rocky Mount High School would eventually be. Now keep in mind, this is from 1912, this map here. So that's Marigold Street there. It kind of bears to the right a little bit, goes by what will eventually be the Rocky Mount High School. Then the first street to the right, once you turn right off of Marigold, back then was Raleigh Street. Now, like I said, now it's called Discovery Street. But you turn right off of Marigold onto what is present day Discovery Street, and that property outlined in red there, that is the property, that is the home of Mr. and Mrs. William Henry Horn. And if you look at this picture, and I will get to the house itself momentarily, but there's some really neat features about this property. And you'll notice, by the way, this property stretches from Raleigh Street there in front of it to the back street, which is George Street. So it literally spans between two. That's how big this property was. Now, there's actually some houses built there, 3 of them, in fact, on the George Street side of the property. So at some point in the past, the family perhaps sold off part of the property and into 3 individual lots. And so now there's 3 houses that face George Street. But that house has a wraparound front porch on it that is actually visible. The outline of the wraparound front porch is visible in this map from 1912. That's what amazed me. When I looked, I said, golly, the house looks just like that now. So anyway, that was 1912. So now let's fast forward again to and by the way, this is still 323 Raleigh Street at this time, okay? So now let's fast forward, Lee, to picture number 5, right? We're at 5 now? Okay, number 5. I'm trying to keep track here. I've got a list in front of me here. I'm trying to keep track as we go along. Picture number 5 is still listed. This is from the city directory of 1920, by the way. And it shows that William Henry, there you go, at the bottom of your screen. William Henry Horn, in 1920, he was the vice president of Alcock and Henry Incorporated. And Alcock and Henry, best I could tell, I didn't find an awful lot about that company. I think they're like a mercantile merchandise, various, I'm not sure, but made of some groceries too, but just general merchandise, I think. But he was the vice president in 1920 of this company. You see the address there, 323 Raleigh Street. And again, this is 1920 when this city directory listing came out here. So I said, okay, I want to fast forward a bit further. So I went to the 1930 city directory just to see where his address was listed then. So Lee, if you would put up the number 7, which is a 1930 city directory listing. And that one, I think, will still show, momentarily here, I think it'll still show the address as 323. As I said, it changed, and I'm not sure exactly what year it changed, but at some point the address of that street changed, or at least his property changed, from 323 to 327. And in later years, it was always referenced as 327, even after, even after Raleigh Street became Discovery Street, it maintained. There you go. Okay, here we go. In 1930, actually, this was the first time I realized that he had changed the address. And you notice now, this is 10 years later, the address is still the same, but it's now, the address has changed to 327, but he's now president of the Tobacco Planters Warehouse and still the vice president of Alcock and Henry. So here's a little quick synopsis about William Henry Horn. He actually was born a farmer. His parents were farmers. He actually started as a farmer himself in business, and then in later years got very much involved in local business. and he was a vice president of a bank. In fact, we'll go ahead and let's go to the next picture, item number 8. I fast forward to 1940, and in 1940, you'll see the address. And by the way, this is another city directory listing here too. And the reason I went to these city directories is just to kind of get an idea of, here we go. If you look at this listing, this is Raleigh Street. You see at the very top of the image there, it says Raleigh S, it's Raleigh Street. And if you scroll down there, near the bottom of the list, 327 Horn, William H., and a little circle with the O. I had to go look up the index for the 1940 city directory, and surprisingly, apparently that home somehow or another was owned by Mr. William H. Horn and Howard Strandberg and Walter Crouch. Many of you recognize Mr. Howard Strandberg was the founder of, one of the original founders, I should say, of Standard Electric, still in operation today by Mr. Strandberg's grandson, Buckley. So I'm not exactly sure how this partnership of ownership in this property came to be, but in the 1940 city directory, as you can see here, 327 Raleigh Street was owned by William Horn, Howard Strandberg, and Walter Crouch, all three. And this is the only time that I've saw a reference that these three gentlemen owned this property together. At some point, Mr. Horn, I guess, bought out this shared ownership from Howard Strandberg and Walter Crouch because everything from here on was always shown as being in the ownership of Mr. Horn and his wife. Okay, so I'll tell you what, Lee, bring it back to me. This is a good time for us to take our first commercial break. We've got some pictures to show you, as I said. We're going to show you some pictures of the house, talk a little bit more about this property and about Mr. Horn himself. And then we're going to go back and revisit a topic from last week's show regarding the old building on South Church Street. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Wayback Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
When faced with special care needs for elderly or disabled loved ones, families want compassionate, comforting care. That's Tender Touch Home Care Services' goal, providing the level of care we would expect for our own. With over 10 years of home care excellence, Tender Touch provides an array of services that keeps your loved one at home. From personal care, light housekeeping, errands, and meal preparation, to our private duty care program, which combines all of our home care offerings in one package.
Tender Touch Home Care Services, where your needs are our concern.
Okay, we're back. Before the break, we were talking about Mr. William Henry Horn, who was a tobacconist. He was a vice president of a couple different companies, very active in the community, and by all accounts, at least eventually, a very wealthy man. His house was certainly one that was attributable to someone of some means. We realized during the break that we had actually skipped an image, so we're going to go back and pick that up now. As I said earlier, he was actually involved in several different businesses, but one of the businesses he was involved with was the First National Bank. And in fact, in 1920, there was an ad in the Rocky Mount Telegram. It said, Lee, if you want to go ahead and put up picture number 6, this is from March the 3rd of 1920. And you see this says First National Bank of Rocky Mount has $125,000 of capital with a surplus of $125,000. Undivided profits of $20,358, and it goes on to list the officers down below, and then at the very bottom, the board of directors And there's some names here that some of you will recognize. I certainly did. I'm going to read them all off to you. You may know some of these people. Dr. G.L. Wimberly Jr., Richard S. Gorham, J.H. Daniel, T.C. Gorham, R.D. Bullock, W.H. Horn, that's the gentleman we're just talking about, W.H. Horn, P.C. Vestal, Dr. Charles E. Edge, J.A. Higgins, W.G. Weeks, N.L. Alcock, Louis Levine, and Z.B. Bullock, and then Frank Fagan. So, as I said, Mr. Horn was actually involved in a lot of things. He was certainly instrumental in the banking industry. As I said, he was a tobacconist and he worked in the tobacco industry. He was a farmer initially, and so I'm not sure, I don't know that his family necessarily had any wealth, but he certainly built up a lot of wealth in his lifetime. In fact, Lee, let's go ahead and go to item number 9. And one of the things that I found interesting was his wife. She was a socialite by anybody's standard, and she traveled extensively. And this was from 1945. It says, Ms. W. Henry Horn, who has been ill at her home on Raleigh Street for the past 3 weeks, has been moved to the Spate Stone Clinic. Her daughter, Mrs. William M. Atkinson, has come down from New York City to be with her. Henry Horn, Jr. of Warrington also spent yesterday in the city visiting his parents. So, and I wanted to say this because, number one, it shows the home street there. It's been on Raleigh Street. But her daughter came in from New York City. Some of these kids went all over the world. One of them went to South America and lived. I think one of them went somewhere out in the Midwest. They didn't have a large family, but they traveled extensively. And Miss Horn was very active in local groups around Rocky Mount, local clubs. She hosted several events with well-known, very influential, very wealthy guests at her home there on Raleigh Street. As I said, she was a socialite, and that's, I mean no disrespect by that term. It was just that she hobnobbed with the fairly well-off in Rocky Mount, and you don't get into that group of people unless you're fairly well-off yourself. So they obviously were a family of some means, and I saw several references in several articles about her. More so, in fact, it was interesting. I found more articles in the Rocky Mount Telegram about Mrs. Horn than I did her husband. Her husband certainly had a very productive business life, but she was very productive her own life with social clubs and so forth. Sadly, May the 30th of 1947, just 2 years after this article appeared in the paper, her husband passed away. And Lee, if you would, put up the obituary there. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I wanted to read some segments of it because it tells a little bit about this man and just what kind of life he led. It says, funerals, this, by the way, this appeared in the Telegram May the 30th of 1947. And you see the headlines there, Horn services planned Sunday. Funeral services of William Henry Horn, 75, well-known farmer and businessman, have been scheduled for 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon from his home at 327 Raleigh Street, with interment following in Pineview Cemetery. Mr. Horn died yesterday in a local hospital after more than 2 years of declining health. Born in Edgecombe County, he was educated at Horner's Military Academy. He came here about the turn of the century and worked as an engineer for the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad, later retiring to handle extensive farming property, which he owned in both Nash and Edgecombe counties. He served on the Board of Commissioners of Edgecombe County, was a city alderman, and for a time was the mayor pro tem of Rocky Mount. He was first president of the publishing company which originated the Telegram in 1911, then known as the Morning Telegram. He terminated his interest with the firm in 1912, and his holdings were purchased by the late J.H. Herbert at that time. It was then that the paper became the Evening Telegram. Mr. Horn also served as the director of the old First National Bank of Rocky Mount. He was president of the Tobacco Planters Warehouse. He was one of the organizers of the wholesale firm of Alcock and Henry and served as president of that business. Surviving are his wife, former Miss Flora Graham, 2 sons, William Henry Jr. of Warrington and Graham Horn of South America, a daughter, Mrs. Margaret Horn Atkinson of New York City. Listen to this list of pallbearers. Active pallbearers were J.R. Bennett Jr., Neil A. Atkins, H.H. Strandberg, W. Lewis Joyner, Robert Wimberly, John Thompson, Ernest Tillman, and H.L. Bell. There's at least a couple of doctors in that group. I recognize family names, I'm sure. And then honorary pallbearers were M.P.J. Williams, R.M. Wilson, Dr. A.L. Daughtridge, Dr. J.A. Spate, Dr. H. Lee Large, Dr. C.S. Smithson, Dr. C.T. Smith, Dr. Enoch Fonville, H.H. Elliott, and C.D. Benbow. That was that last group I just listed was the honorary pallbearers. So obviously this man, by the time he passed away in 1947, he had certainly made a name for himself in business and in industry in Rocky Mount. He certainly was well known in social circles, he and his wife both. Very well respected gentleman, and certainly had a lot to be proud of that he accomplished during his life here in Rocky Mount, from the time he came here in the turn of the century until he died in 1947. Okay, in 1963 was the next thing that I found about either one of these two, him or his wife. And so Lee, if you would, put up picture number 11 for us. And picture number 11 tells it's a little blip that appeared in the paper in November 27th of 1963. And apparently Miss Horn at that time had suffered a fall. And it said Mrs. W. Henry Horn is a patient at Memorial Hospital having tripped and fallen Friday night at her home on Raleigh Street. This was in 1963. Now, her and her husband both were born in the 1870s. I think he was born in 1871, she was born in 1872. So she was getting on up in age at this point. And so, like I say, she fell at home, ended up in the hospital, and she actually passed away. I think, I had her obituary and I forgot to bring it with me, but she was 96 years old when she died. She far outlived her husband. He died at 75, she died at 96. When she died, I think she was still living at 327 Raleigh Street. And sadly, that was in 1969, by the way, that she passed away. I'm not exactly sure when the house was sold. I did see a deed of sale from 2002, where the current owner bought the property. So between 1969 and 2002, when this most recent owner purchased the property, I don't know who had it in that interim time, and it's possible that it stayed in the family for a good part of that time. But Eric talked to, I believe it was, I forgot who he said he talked to, but anyway, the gentleman had gone in the house and said it was just really, really neat, beautiful home inside and out. And this would have been in the 1970s, I think. So anyway, I've got some pictures I wanted to share with you of the home. And so Lee, if you would, let's just go through these pictures. I took these today. I went over and I did a walk around the house, and it's really a shame that this house was such a beautiful home. And you can tell, there is the front of the home. You see the wraparound porch that literally goes around both sides of the house. There's some really ornate woodwork. There's plastic, some kind of plastic film or plastic sheeting or something over all the windows and doors. There was one area I could actually look into and see, and it was just heartbreaking. I mean, the floor was rotted out. I would not even attempt to go in this house. It was certainly unsafe. But you stop and look at this house and you think about, and it doesn't look that big in this picture, but it goes back. It goes back quite a ways. You can see it's a two-story house there, but at the very back of the property, it looked to be some kind of servant's quarters, perhaps. It's so grown up at the very back now, you can't get too far back there. I did walk around. In fact, Lee, let's go ahead and just go through these pictures here. You can just kind of go through, spend a few seconds on each one of them. I think there's about 10 of them altogether. There you can see the wraparound porch going around to one side of the house. And there's columns there, and there's ornate woodwork all around this house. It was a lot of craftsmen went into it. Down in the foreground of the picture, you see there's like concrete, or I guess it's concrete drive, a circular drive that came in from one side and came around the front of the house and then circled back out the other side. I can just imagine this was a really, really fine home in its heyday. As I said, it was built sometime around the turn of the century. The earliest I could find was 1908, 1909 that the property was shown as being built. This is really heartbreaking. You look at it on the right-hand side, the wall's buckled out. You see the column has slipped out of place there. There was a time probably not too far along ago, this house could have been saved. I mean, I don't know what was a year or 5 years or 10 years ago, but at some point, this house was still salvageable. Someone could have gone in there and repaired the problems and made someone a really nice home. Obviously, that didn't happen, and the house is now just really a bad state of disrepair. And it's a shame because it was obviously a very fine home at one point. From what I understand, back in the 1970s, Chauncey Hill, I think it was, Eric was telling me about, actually went into the house with some other real estate developers. I think the house was up for sale then somewhere around $25,000 or $30,000. And they said that house at that point, inside and outside, needed absolutely nothing. It was pristine inside and out. It was ready to move in other words. And for whatever reason, they chose not to buy the house. But you can see it's either boarded up, the windows. That one door there is open, and I didn't attempt to go in because I could look in and see the floor was rotted out. But this, it was just a grand home, and it's just a shame that this house, frankly, now should be torn down. It is absolutely unsafe, and it's too far gone. There's no fixing this house now. There's no way it can be salvaged. It would cost more to try to repair it than it would to tear it down and build one just like it on the same property. So it's beyond repair, it's beyond salvage, it's beyond saving at this point. But sadly, there's a lot of houses like this all over Rocky Mount that are just too far gone. And I don't know the gentleman who owned this. I did find a name, and I don't want to call his name. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But he's had the house since 2002. The sale date on this house was 2002. And so that's 20 years that one person has owned this property. And in that 20-year time frame, it was not in this bad a shape when they first acquired it. So it has absolutely been let go. Look at that really ornate work. This is around the front porch here, obviously. But it's a crying shame. It really is that this house was neglected in this manner. And so there's really just, as I said, it's too far gone. There's just nothing can be done with it now. So Lee, I'm not sure. I lost count of where we are. When we get to 21, let me know. That's picture number 21. This may be the end of it here. I think we're close. You can still see the remnants of the curved driveway here with the concrete. It curved around, and also down the side house. See to your left there, the drive pulled in there, and you could access the back part of the property through this drive here. And of course, the circle drive came around in front of the house and came around the other side. So there's some really, neat architectural aspects of the house, and it's just, I can't keep hitting don't want to keep hitting a dead horse, but it's just a shame that this house has been neglected to the extent that it has been. I don't think it'll be around much longer. So that was the last one, Lee? Okay. All right. So if you remember from last week's show, we talked about the old Munn Griffin building down on South Church Street. And I had gotten to a point where when I was trying to find ownership of the building and occupancy of the building over the years, I had a span of about 20-some years there where I couldn't find anything. And so I mistakenly said that the building was empty for 20 years. And then a very astute caller called in and said, no, it was not empty because I worked there. And so I thought, well, you know what? And they mentioned that Eastern Electric was a business that was in there. And as soon as I heard that, I remembered, yes, Eastern Electric was in that building. I went in there and bought parts on occasion, in fact. So I wanted to go back and see how I had missed that. And so I did some more research. And instead of searching for the address, I searched for the name of the business. And that led me down a really interesting path that went all the way back to the 1930s. And one of the things I found was that, strangely enough, the building address, at least the people who were occupying the building, used a different address at different points of time. Same building, but at one point it was listed as 502 South Church Street. At another time it was listed as 500 South Church Street. Very same building, very same property. I'm not sure why that discrepancy. The building was big enough to take up 2 or 3 addresses, obviously, but some chose to use the address of 500, some chose the address of 502. So that being said, what I found was when I started going back in time and looking for newspaper articles and city directory listings and trying to put together a pathway that got Eastern Electric into that building, what I found was there was two companies that were very closely intermingled. One was called Hammond Electric and one was called Eastern Electric. As you see on the bottom of your screen there, Hammond Electric, and by the way, this appeared in the 1934 Rocky Mount City Directory. And as you can see on your screen, it says Hammond Electric Company, John G. Hammond Contractors, Supplies, Motor Repairs especially, and the address is listed as 129 to 131 Western Avenue. And so I thought, okay, so how do we get from Western Avenue to 500 South Church Street? So I got to research some more. Fast forward to 1937, and in 1937, this ad appeared, and Lee, you can go ahead and put that one up there. It was another ad for Hammond Electric, and it actually lists, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was this is 34 or 37, Lee? Which one were you at? I lost my train of thought here. Okay, this is 1934. Okay, go ahead and put that one up. And this is another ad that appeared. There you go. 1934, Hammond Electric, you see is 129 Western Avenue. They advertised water pumps, radios, light fixtures, and electric wiring. So what I determined was that Hammond Electric was basically like an electrical contractor. They did work for the city of Rocky Mount. They did sell electrical components like water pumps and light fixtures and so forth, the radios you see there. But they were not a supplier per se of electrical parts, which is where Eastern Electric came into being. So item number 24, Lee, now I think, we've put that up. This is the first ad I saw referencing Eastern Electric. And as you see there, it says announcing the formal opening of Eastern Electric Supply Incorporated at 127 South Washington Street. Now we're still not at Church Street, so bear with me. 127 South, and by the way, this is generally in the area down there across from Moore's Bicycle Shop. That's where this was, 127 South Washington Street. And this was the first reference that I found to the Eastern Electric Supply Company. Now, in a minute, we'll get to how the Eastern Electric Supply Company and the Hammond Electric Company are tied together. And I just realized it was time for our next commercial break. So let's go ahead and take our break. When we come back, we'll tie these two together, and we'll carry you all the way up to Eastern Electric getting into the old Munn Griffin building at 500 South Church Street. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these words.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
When faced with special care needs for elderly or disabled loved ones, families want compassionate, comforting care. That's Tender Touch Home Care Services' goal, providing the level of care we would expect for our own. With over 10 years of home care excellence, Tender Touch provides an array of services that keeps your loved one at home. From personal care, light housekeeping, errands, and meal preparation, to our private duty care program, which combines all of our home care offerings in one package.
Tender Touch Home Care Services, where your needs are our concern.
And we're back. If you're just tuning in, folks, we're talking about Hammond Electric and Eastern Electric and how these two companies were very closely tied together. And if you remember from the last picture, in 1937, Eastern Electric was located at 127 South Washington Street. All right, in the same issue of the Rocky Mount Telegram where that ad appeared, this next ad appeared, item number 25, Lee, if you would. This is also from 1937, so the same exact issue, and it said, "Congratulations to Eastern Electric Supply on the occasion of their formal opening." And this was, of course, this ad was sponsored by Hammond Electric Company. And you see the address there for Hammond Electric was 131 Western Avenue. So in 1937, on the same day, same issue of the Telegram, the Eastern Electric was located at 127 South of Washington Street. The Hammond Electric was listed at 131 Western Avenue. So at that point, there are two separate businesses, two separate locations, two separate entities. And I said, okay, so how do we get them two together? So fast forward to January the 1st of 1938. And Lee, if you would, let's put up picture number 26. And you'll see here, it says, "We have moved to our new home, 822 South Church Street." Notice the address, 822 South Church Street, "where we'll be better positioned to serve our trade, Eastern Electric Supply Company." So they moved from 127 South Washington Street to 822 South Church Street, Eastern Electric did. And this ad appeared January the 1st of 1938, listing a new location for Eastern Electric in Rocky Mount. Okay, so now this next article is really, really small. I do apologize, but it tells the story of Hammond Electric. So Lee, if you would, just for illustration sakes, put it on the screen. I clipped this out and saved this because it tells the story of Hammond Electric. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, and we're going to put it on the screen just so you see, kind of get an idea. It took up the whole page, and you can actually zoom out, Lee, a little bit there. But it literally did. This article took the whole page. And the right-hand side, where all this blank is, there were some other articles there. But the headline, I should say, took the whole front page. "Pioneer Electrical Contracting Company occupies new plant here." And it goes on to read, paralleling its growth with a broad expansion of the industrial use of electric power in eastern North Carolina, Hammond Electric Company Electrical Contractors is now located at 824 South Church Street. So if you remember the previous picture, the ad referenced Eastern Electric at 822 South Church Street. So in January 1st of 1938, Hammond Electric opened up at 824 South Church Street, literally right next door to Eastern Electric. So it goes on to say, the business was begun by J.G. Hammond Jr., J.M. Shorb, and C.W. Hunt as the electric shop on Washington Street. Now, if you remember, and it goes on to say, the business did all classes of electrical work, including charging the first automobile battery in Rocky Mount. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a battery shop that was on the corner of Hill Street and Washington Street, where in later years, the Pepsi-Cola bottling plant was. Of course, Camasco was there. The Rocky Mount Popcorn Company was there. On that spot was where this Hammond actually got started. And they developed and moved and eventually ended up right beside Eastern Electric they were at 824 South Church Street. Eastern was at 822 South Church Street. So if you think about it, that's the epitome of a symbiotic relationship. Oh, we got a call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller, you on the air?
Yeah, Randy, I was interested in that house you were pointing out there. I used to go by that house in the 90s, and I noticed how huge and fancy and ornate it was.
Yes, sir.
And I remember there were some men working there inside that house, and they were taking out the fixtures, like light fixtures, handrails.
Oh, wow.
Wooden bathroom fixtures, things like that. So basically what I think is that house has been stripped of all of its fancy apparel.
I think you're exactly right. From what I could tell looking out to the from the outside looking in today, there was not even walls in it anymore. I mean, I say studs up there where the walls were. So I think you're exactly right. I don't know who did that. It's a shame, but there's nothing left. You're right.
Apparently it was very valuable. Those men worked there for a long time, getting all of that woodwork and brass work or whatever it was out there. Oh, and one more thing, that little story you told the other week there about going to the A&P store there from Barham Wilson Junior High.
Yes, sir.
Well, I had a similar occurrence to that. This was back in the 60s. I was going to R.M. Wilson, and one day me and some of my comrades were standing out there on the school ground at lunchtime. So somebody got the bright idea and said, well, let's go over there to the Little Mint and get us some hot dogs. So we went over there to the Little Mint, scooted over there to the Little Mint, got us some hot dogs, and ran back over there and got behind the gymnasium back there, and that's where we ate them at. But unfortunately, we quickly got caught and got sent to the office and got paddled.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you weren't the only one to do that little jaunt.
That's all then.
All right, buddy.
I'll see you later.
All right, thanks for calling in. Have a good night.
Good night.
Yeah, I'm sure that happened many times over the years. I'm not going to say how many times I made that trip across Arlington Street and back again, but it was more than once. But anyway, okay, so in 1938, Eastern Electric, Hammond Electric were side by side. And, you know, that, as I said, it's the perfect example of a symbiotic relationship there. Standard Electric was a supply company. They supplied electrical parts, components, etc. And Hammond Electric was an electrical contractor, basically. And so they would get parts from their next door neighbor and then put them install them in residential applications. They did work for the city of Rocky Mount. In fact, that was one of their biggest customers. I read somewhere where they put in something like 135,000 horsepower of motors in one year span, I think it was. And so you got to remember, in the 1930s, electrical motor horsepower was pretty much coming of age then. It had been around for a few years, but they were finding more and more uses for electric motors. And so Hammond Electric happened to be at the right place at the right time, and they were pretty successful at it. So let's go ahead and move forward a little bit here. 1938, let's see, that was picture number 28, right, Lee? 27. That was 27. Okay, well, let's go to 28 then. I keep getting out of whack here. I've got a list right in front of me here. Okay, there you go. This building is actually this white building you see on your right-hand side. That was two addresses there, 822 and 825. 822 was the address for Eastern Electric, and 825 was the address for Hammond Electric, which was the contractor. A keen eye can see way down the street on the right-hand side, that's Davenport Motor Company, which I think is the address like 900 South Church Street. That kind of gives you an idea of where you are there. So this building, I think right now is empty. These two buildings, I should say, because there's actually two adjoining buildings there. But in 1938, these two buildings were a home for Eastern Electric Supply Company and Hammond Electric Contracting Company. And so, okay, Lee, now put up picture number 29. And here you go. This was an article appeared January of 1938. 4 Rocky Mountain men attend Raleigh meeting. It says 4 Rocky Mountain men attended sessions of the Convention of North Carolina chapter of the International Association of Electrical Inspectors in Raleigh yesterday. The convention, which was scheduled, addressed by Governor Clyde Hoey and Mayor George Isley of Raleigh, as well as by electrical authorities from various parts of the country. Those who attended were J.G. Hammond of Hammond Electric, W.G. Trevathan from Eastern Electric Supply Company, W.V. Ellington of the City Utilities Department, and Graham Shorb of Public Electric Service Company. So, as I said, these two companies were very closely related as far as business and serving each other and providing revenue for each other. I don't know, I looked and tried to find some kind of family connection or some means that these two companies were related in some way. I'm not saying they weren't, I just never could find any documentation to say that they were, so I won't. But they were certainly very closely working together in the 1930s. I don't know what happened to Hammond Electric, I really don't. I didn't find very much after the 1930s on Hammond. Of course, let me back up a minute. I did find a couple more ads, and we'll share those with you. Go ahead, Lee, and put up, let's get this call first. Hello, caller, you on the air?
All right, the connection between those two different Hammond businesses was simply this, that Mr. Graham Hammond that owned the electric motor business down there, he had a brother named Bill Hammond who was involved with the electrical supply business. And they were there next door to one another near the business of Davenport Motor Company. until Bill Hammond moved Eastern Electric Supply from that location down there to the Munn building.
Okay.
I think is the way that happened.
Right, it is. You're right.
They were two brothers.
Okay. Well, I didn't realize that one of the brothers was involved with Eastern Electric. I never saw that in any research I was doing, but that makes sense as you say that because
His name, and he was still there and in place when they were located and operating in the Munn Griffin building.
Okay. Well, good. That's good to know. I'll make a note of that right now. Okay, buddy. Appreciate it. Okay, so that explains that, how they got connected there by the two brothers. So Lee, if you would, let's go to picture number 30. And this ad appeared December 24th of 1945. And it's just a Christmas ad. You see the season's greeting there at the top. Up, there we go. And you see it says, and this ad was sponsored, of course, by Eastern Electric at 822 South Church Street and Hammond Electric at 824 South Church Street. So in 1945, they were still located side by side on South Church Street at 822 and 824. I've got another call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Randy, good evening. Enjoying the show. Just a couple of comments. You mentioned earlier tonight Spur Gas on Marigold.
Yes, sir.
It was located right up there close to the railroad track on Marigold. As I recall, they had a big display of glassware and plates, china. If you buy enough gas, you get some credit or something and get a free dish or cup, saucer, that sort of thing.
Okay.
That's kind of unusual.
Yeah.
And the Spate Stone Clinic.
Right.
I don't know, but I would just be guessing that might have been a forerunner of the Memorial Hospital on Rose Street. That was the location that Mrs. Horn went to originally and later went to Memorial.
Well, you know, it is possible.
The Stone was at Memorial and removed my tonsils in the early 50s.
No kidding. Oh, wow.
53.
Uh-huh.
I don't know which stone it was, if it was the stone that started the clinic or maybe a son, I'm not quite sure. But just a couple of interesting thoughts I wanted to share.
Yeah, okay. Well, I appreciate you calling in, Bob. Good to hear from you, buddy.
Take care.
Right.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Okay. Yeah, actually, when Miss Horn was taken to the Spate Stone Clinic, I actually looked that up, and at that time, the address was listed as something Tarboro Street, and it was in that same general area, just adjacent to, I believe, the old post office, if I'm not mistaken, and which is not too far from the Memorial Hospital. So it's entirely possible that both of those options, one or the other or both, were instrumental in getting the hospital. They might have been working in the hospital and had a clinic on the side too. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, okay, we're almost out of time, so let's go ahead and bust open one more call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
All right, going back what you're talking about right now about that Spate Munn Clinic, that was what was later the Memorial Hospital. There were 5 doctors involved in that place: Dr. Spate, Dr. Leslie O. Stone, Dr. Bell. I don't remember the other two, but they were the medical personnel that had that hospital over there on the corner of Rose Street and Atlantic Avenue.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Sure does. Okay, buddy.
There was another doctor there. His name was Dr. Way. He had a son named Sammy Way that was in Rocky Mountain High School in the late 50s with me.
Okay.
There were 5 medical doctors that were there in that building.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right, buddy. Thank you. Okay. All right, we're almost out of time. So I tell you what, Lee, let's go to picture number 31, I think is where we are now. This is just another ad, and we'll just do this one real quickly. It just talks about they had a business expo, Better Living Expo. This was May of 1958. And as you can see here, Hammond Electric was listed as being at 822 South Church. So they were still at South Church Street in 1958. In 1962, Eastern Electric was also still at 822 South Church Street. They were still side by side. Oh, you know what? I just realized these two ads, one's in 1958 and one's in 1962. They both, one of them's for Hammond Electric and one's for Eastern Electric, and they both are listed with the same address, 822 South Church Street. It was in 1968 that Eastern Electric, picture number 33, they will make this one the last one tonight. 1968, November 21st, there was a congratulation ad that appeared. Eastern Electric was actually now located at 500 South Church Street, and that is the old Munn Griffin building. And they were there actually up until 1970, I think it was. No, I'm sorry, 1988. I've got a note here. The last ad that I could find for Eastern Electric was in August of 1988, and they had a one little line listing, and at that time they were at 500 South Church Street. So from 68 to 88, they were indeed at the Munn Griffin building, Eastern Electric I should say, were at the Munn Griffin building. And in 1991, I believe it was, Chair and Equipment Rentals moved into that building, and they were there up until they moved out a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. So anyway, Lee, bring it back to me. Folks, that's going to do it for us tonight. We've run slam out of time. I want to thank those that called in and shared your thoughts and your memories with us. Always good to hear from you. We had some more pictures of old stores and stuff we didn't get to tonight. We'll try to bring those onto the show next week for you. Thanks again for tuning in and watching tonight. Have a great week, folks. Take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. We'll see you next week with more Wayback Wednesday. Good night.